Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Connecting for Climate. Welcome to one of the MDB talks. My name's Steve Hammer. I'm with the World Bank Group in Washington, D.C. I'm very pleased to have you with us here today in person or online. This is one of the many events that are taking place at the pavilion that is being hosted by several of the multilateral development banks from around the world. Today's session, we're really very fortunate to be focusing on an important topic, an important perspective, and an important movement. And we have a variety of different perspectives that we're going to be bringing to it today. But before I jump in and introduce the panel, I did want to just make mention of the fact that if you are online and if you are going to be tweeting, please use the hashtag MDBTalks. You can see it up on the board. We'd love to have you share this information. We think we're going to have an exciting panel, exciting conversation today, and hope you'll share this with your friends around the world. So the focus today is on the role of youth in the climate movement. If you've been looking in the media, if you've been looking online, there have been several people who are beginning to step up, who are capturing the attention of the policy community, capturing the attention of the world. We have one of them with us today, but we've also got some other leading experts from within the climate world itself. We have experts from within government, we have experts from within civil society, and we have an observer, a filmmaker, who is capturing, and has been capturing for many years now, the conversations that go on at these types of meetings, and has now put all of that together into a movie that hopefully you'll be able to watch more, and she'll tell you about that in just a minute. But again, let me introduce from my immediate right. I have Greta Thunberg. Did I do that justice? Close enough?
Yeah, it was good.
Okay, very good. She's a youth climate leader, global youth climate leader, and very well known for her has become known as the School Strike for Climate. We have Minister Seruiratu from Fiji. He's been the climate champion for the Fijian government, was very involved in COP23 and all of the work that the Fiji presidency did, the COP23 presidency did over the last year. We're very grateful that you can join us today, Minister. We have Slater Jewell-Kemker, an award-winning film director, who has prepared this feature documentary that she'll be telling us about, that I mentioned has been tracking the conversation over time at different COPs, and she's going to be talking to us today about Youth Unstoppable. And then we have Jean-Paul Brice Affana, a policy advisor for climate finance and development at Germanwatch, a leading NGO, an observer of the climate summit, the climate negotiations. Thank you all for being here today. Again, we're asking to focus the conversation on a particular slice of who is engaging in this conversation, what that conversation sounds like, and where it might go in the future. So I'm going to start off by asking each of our guests one or two questions. We'll go down the line for that, but then I really want to turn this into a conversation. Let you ask some questions, let the panel ask some questions of each other, so that we can have a dialogue going on here. So, Greta, let me start with you. In many ways, you have quickly become the face of the youth climate movement around the world. Tell us about how you got started. Tell us about this School Strike for Climate, what you've learned from that experience, and what are you trying to tell people on your visit here to Poland?
Yes, I have, ever since I have been much younger, been interested in the climate crisis, because it's such a strange subject, because people say one thing and they do another thing. And I mean, if the climate change was real, we wouldn't be talking about anything else. That would be our first priority, but no one ever even mentioned it, and I thought that was very strange. And so then I started to read about it more and more, and the more I read about it, the more I realized how emergent the situation we are in is. And then no one was doing anything, nothing was happening, the emissions just continue to rise. And then I thought that if no one does anything, then I have to do something. So then I did it.
So one day you woke up and you decided you're going to step up and say something, you're going to take action. What did you do?
Yes, there were some youths in the United States that refused to go to school because of the school shootings. And then someone I knew said, what if children did that for the climate? And then I thought that was a good idea. That could make a difference, and then I decided to do it. And I tried to bring more people to join me, but no one was really interested, so I had to do it alone.
And what did you learn from that experience?
I learned that you are never too small. You are never too small to make a difference, and that anyone can do something.
That's very impressive, very bold, and very insightful. And I'm glad that you're here to talk to us about it. Slater, I want to jump to you because you've been observing people like Greta for some time. You've been meeting them around the world. How many Gretas are out there? Why are they deciding to step up and take this kind of action, becoming a voice on this issue?
I think sometimes what can be difficult is that not everyone realizes that they can be a Greta, that sometimes it is hard to move beyond the idea of I'm just one person, how can I affect change? I started 10 years ago when I was also 15, and I felt very much alone and was wondering why nothing was happening. I mean, if you really look at it, for 26 years this conversation has been happening, and young people have been stepping up asking, why is nothing being done? Why is this most important thing to affect all of our lives, not the very crux of all of our decision making? So I think young people are out there, and they are standing up, and they are demanding that if our governments aren't going to be making the changes that we need to, we're going to step around them. I'm sorry, what was the last part of your question?
It's really what is driving people to do this? I think you've addressed that issue, but how are they taking this action? What does it sound like when others are also stepping up? I mean, this was a very innovative, bold move to sit and say, I'm not going to move, I'm not going to do what I might otherwise do until I can get some attention and people begin to take action. Are you seeing similar types of activity, or how does this manifest itself in other parts of the world?
I mean, within the movement, there are so many different ways that young people are becoming involved and making their voices heard, whether it is one person saying, I'm not going to go to school and because this is so important. You have artists being involved, you have people being involved directly in policy, showing up to UN climate change conferences and being part of that conversation. You have other people who are telling stories, like myself, who are trying to take something that is so strange and is so overwhelming and to make it a conversation that is more about what it means to be human and our connections to each other and to the planet. And so really, I think that's why we're all involved in climate change as well, is that it is such an enormous conversation, and that can be overwhelming, but it can also be very exciting because we have to change everything.
So, Jean-Paul, one of the things that the civil society movement often does is it can bring people together, it can give them a collective voice, it can help provide some strategic insights or some data-driven insights into where they might wish to go. Talk to me about what you're seeing out there in the larger movement around the world about, does this kind of message, does the voice that youth is bringing to this conversation, is it different than what others are talking about, or is everybody aligned in terms of the perspective that they're trying to put in front of the policymakers, in front of the negotiators, in front of their national leaders?
Uh, Thank you very much. I think I'm happy to first hear the stories from Greta, from Slater. I got to know Greta on Twitter, the platform today where you really make connection, and Slater, we know each other since I think 2012-11, when the whole world had the view to make Rio Plus 20 the successful conference ever, hoping that Rio Plus 20 will solve the problems, the global challenges. And when I'm in the UN Climate Change Conference today, nobody talks about the Rio Declaration, nobody talks about what was discussed 9 years ago. I feel very disappointed, because that means 8 years ago, 9 years ago, young people like Slater, those who came after us were really involved in making the world better so many years ago, but all the efforts today seem to be vain. And when we come back again, we say young people have to create the change, policymakers have to be more aware. I'm asking myself, which kind of awareness do we want? What are we looking for? We cannot always meet every year, and in between we meet every semester, and we say we want to make things different because there's always hope. I think the problem is that policymakers could be seen as old school guys. They don't have innovative way of seeing how do we actually make solutions happening by building on our own personal histories. And that's why Talanoa connects us, for example. How do you bring your own story? I sat in many different rooms. I got the chance to, for example, be on the Cameroon delegation sometimes during these climate talks. And I never hear any delegate using their own personal story to make sure that others understand what they mean, actually. And this is kind of so boring, so old school style. And young people say, no, we don't want to communicate about making change possible in the same way, because there are so many different creative, innovative ways to make that happen. And what I have seen over the years out there coming from young people is that, first of all, they really start from the little thing. You start with your strike at your school level. It's a small action that can grow very fast. I made a tweet 2 days ago about Greta, one tweet. And for the first time, since I'm tweeting, since 2009, I got more than 100 likes on a tweet. Seriously, I was impressed. And I'm sure by the end of the COP, I will have 500 people liking the post. And I realized that it's not because of my tweet, but it's because of people realizing that children, young people, are more aware than some of the policymakers. And it's because they bring personal stories on board. And what Slater has been doing also, I have followed some of her work. She started with an inconvenient youth video some years ago. People were like, okay, what is this video about? But when you start watching, she followed the journey of a young lady from Nepal, which is a common friend of us, about how is she dealing in her community with climate change. And you really connect to the stories of the people. You connect to the heart. We have this heart connection to people because we understand what they go through. And I think that's what really makes the difference in the way young people communicate about the climate crisis. And it's something that policymakers could really learn without being shy to bring their personal stories on board. And I'm really thankful that this approach really works.
So, Minister, we just heard a very interesting interpretation of the role that the Talanoa has played. Talk to us about, and this was really an attempt by your government to use the formal process, to use the agreement itself and the fact that there was to be an informal stock take in 2018, 3 years after the signing of the approval of the Paris Agreement. And you turned it into something that, according to some, turned into an opportunity to personalize this. What was the thinking? How did you drive this forward, and what have you seen occur as a result of that over the last year?
Thank you, Steve. First, I wish to acknowledge the parties for embracing the Talanoa concept. It was initially planned to be the facilitative dialogue, and as agreed to by the parties, it has been rebranded as the Talanoa dialogue. The Talanoa is about sharing stories. It's about being heard. It's about finding common solutions to the problems that we face. And it's about an inclusive, friendly environment. So The Talanoa concept has been accepted as we collectively look at ways and means in which we have to confront and address the problem right before us, as alluded to, and we are well aware of, climate change. Climate change affects everyone. Our Prime Minister always keeps referring to this canoe because we are from the Pacific, and it's our way of living. Transportation is a big emitter now, but for us, if we go back to the traditional ways of transportation, it's through these canoes that we have. So we are all in the same canoe, and we all are rowing to a common destination, and that common destination is about a net zero emission by the mid-century, and of course working towards a 1.5 degrees. That is the common destination, and because we are all in the same canoe, climate change affects all of us, regardless of who we are and where we live. Because climate change affects all of us, we all need to take responsibility. We all need to take responsibility. We need to take ownership. And as alluded to by Greta, nobody is small to contribute. We all have a role to play. And this whole Talanoa is about partnership and inclusivity. No government alone will be able to fulfill the requirements of the Paris Agreement. We have governments to play their role, and we have subnational governments. The cities are very actively involved, and this is where most of the emissions are taking place. Civil society has to take ownership, and it's all across sector, it's all across region, and it all comes down to individuals. And the Talanoa concept has created that environment because we were demarcated because of the rules. These are the parties, these are the non-parties. But the Secretary General clearly stated yesterday that multilateralism is not only intergovernmental, it's about all of us participating. We have a role to play, and we have our countries have committed to their nationally determined contributions. But these nationally determined contributions, it's not only parties that are going to be involved. It involves all of us. As I've stated, it's multi-sectoral, multi-regional, or cross-regional, and through the Talanoa concept, we come up with our own stories, how climate change is affecting us, and it's not only our own stories on how it's affecting us, but solutions as well. We all have our own solutions. Our youths are full of innovations and new ideas, and we need to tap into this. And the Talanoa embraces all of us so that we can all participate and contribute towards finding common solutions as we work towards this common destination. So it's about that inclusivity and partnership where we need to take responsibility.
So how do we, I observed the conversation that took place, again, that was formally integrated into the COP process last spring. And it was fascinating over the course of a day, the number of people who showed up, the perspectives they brought to this conversation. But many of them were reporting back on the dialogues, the Talanoas that they were involved in at home. And they were reporting out on what they had heard, what they had learned. How do we keep that type of dialogue going? How do we build a global momentum that policy listens, that it reflects these kinds of very personal perspectives on that?
There are a few approaches, I would say. One, for us particularly, under the UNFCCC processes, we have tried to move this into the, particularly into the developing countries, what we call shifting to the global south. And this year, there has been Talanoas in Singapore for the Asia-Pacific region, in Montevideo in Uruguay for the Latin America and that part of the world, and of course in Africa as well. And of course I've talked about across sectors where we have the cities, municipalities doing their own talanoas as well. So these various talanoas feed into the main talanoa that we are having here. Not only the talanoas, but we also have the summary for policymakers. We have the yearbook. This involves all the non-party stakeholders. And of course, we are looking forward to next week, where we will have the main talanoa, and then there will be that will be an outcome of this COP24 as well, and we look forward to decisions, whatever the outcome of the talanoa will be. And of course, it's all about raising ambition. And for us, it's important that as we conclude COP24, the IPCC report is already there. And it really drives home the fact that we need to step up ambition if we need to change things for the betterment of all of us. And this is how these processes are interlinked, and of course with the main outcome that we are looking forward to next week.
So, John Paul, the civil society groups around the world, are focused on advocating for specific types of policies, technologies, engagement mechanisms, again, seeking to bring voices from around the world into these conversations in a formal and informal way. The talanoa, as we heard, ends in one way next week, bringing all of the information that's been learned over the last year to a single point in time. But from your perspective, how do we keep that going?
I think the approach is very clear. To keep that going is first of all to understand what the Ambassador has said. We are all in the same canoe. We cannot have people who are lazy and others working hard to move the canoe in the direction we want to go. Achieving net zero emission in terms of CO2 means collective action. It's a collective journey. We share the same planet. The decisions here are a bit complex because we have different parties dealing with different topics without being aware of what's going on the other side and how this could block the next step. I remember during the SBs, the intersessional session in Bonn in April, May this year, the only topic that was concluded was about action for climate empowerment, the ACE dialogue, the ACE topic, which is about Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, education, public awareness, training, capacity building in climate change. And when you look at the people working on these different topics, these different cross-cutting issues, most of them are young people. Most of them are civil society actors. Young people are those raising awareness through different means, medias and so on, movies, social media campaigning. They are those who are designing local training programs. They are those who are into education. They are those who were very active in the Article 6 of the Convention before we had the Article 12 of the Paris Agreement. It means they have positive attitude and positive energy to move the canoe forward. When you look at climate finance, we are stuck. The adaptation fund doesn't have enough resources. It's not clear if the fund will have a future. It means it's not a topic important for most of the negotiators. When you look at gender action plan, we are stuck. When you look at the global stocktake, we are blocked in those thematic, very specific, strange sounding topics. It means that we have to bring people together. A negotiator involved in the Article 12 of the Paris Agreement has to be aware about how can we achieve education, training, capacity building, awareness raising when we don't have financing available for supporting climate action. You cannot have a best decision without resources to implement it. And that's where we are now. We have the Paris Agreement, we don't have a rule book. We will have a rule book, we will not have the resources. That's the next step. And sometimes I ask myself, is the UN creating a mechanism, a process where things have to be blocked so that the UN continues existing? It's a question I ask myself since many years. And I think with a question like climate change, we don't have to question ourselves further. I like the tweet from Greta. She said, I will not beg world leaders to make a decision here at COP24. I will tell them whether or not they want to make a decision, the change is going to come. The change will happen. The question is in which direction? in the zero net emission scenario we want to achieve, or in the worst scenario case based on the IPCC report? That's a key question. And I will encourage people in this room, when you talk to delegates, when you talk to yourself, when you talk to other civil society, to different stakeholders, ask them, how old will you be in 2050? Where will you be? If you have children, in which kind of world are they going to live? Decision based on paper, decision based on consensus are great, but the biggest part is the implementation. And I think that civil society is aware of that, and sometimes we tend to say, we are ready now to implement, to make things happening at the local level, but we need this institutional support because the United Nations rely on governments. When the governments block, nothing can happen. But despite that, we bring the change happening, and we use other different means. And I will quickly conclude here in like 5 seconds. I like the approach of bringing like personal stories a lot, because when I was a child, I remember, for example, how my brothers and my grandmother, we live a lot with my grandmother when we were children. We were struggling with floods as children a lot. And my grandmother found a way to adapt to the floods. So she involved us in digging the dikes all the time, making sure that we can create ways for water. And sometimes we were waking them up at 6 a.m. in the morning because water was in the house. You sleep and then suddenly your mattress is floating on the water. You wonder what's going on. And the next hour at 7 a.m. you have to be at school. And when you sleep in the classroom because of being tired, because you have to fight against the water and the floods the whole night, the teacher doesn't know your story. He's angry that you are a lazy student because you sleep in the classroom. But the reality is that your story, your personal story, is that you had floods you had to fight against. And if you were able to share that story, the teacher will have better understand you and never tell you, I'm not sure you will graduate. Because my teacher told it, many teachers told that to me. I don't think you will get your advanced level. And you frustrate a young person, you block the creativity. And I'm happy to be here today and to work as a policy advisor. It means believe in yourself, create the mobilization, and share your personal story. It's important.
So Slater, artists have forever been communicating stories, communicating lessons, communicating ideas, and you have a very powerful story to tell through Youth Unstoppable. We'd love to hear about that itself, but also more broadly, how is the arts community bringing its voice? How does it choose to communicate, particularly the youth artist movement?
It communicates through stories, whether that's through visual arts or through dance or through theater or what have you. It is just what you said. It's the arts community is stepping up by sharing stories, by being able to take our personal experiences, by taking other people's personal experiences and making it something more of the heart that people can connect to and experience. Sometimes I find, within my own community, which is a very conservative farming community, or et cetera, the only way that I can engage in the conversations that I need to about what the future looks like and why this is important is going through another route through the arts, because we ultimately all are human, and stories are how we connect and communicate with each other. They've from a young age are how we are able to look at the world around us and determine just who we are as people and the communities that we live in. And so I think it's just another example of how people will be able to rise to the challenge of climate change, rise to the challenge of changing everything within our society if they're able to connect on a heart level. Because sometimes I think people are really turned off on it, and the general population don't want to talk about it because it's overwhelming, or the language is complicated, or they don't see how it affects them personally. This may be more in the West. And by making it something that they can look outside of the bubble of their own life and see how they're actually connected to a human family, makes it something that is exciting and that they want to be a part of. It makes the future not so desperate and full of despair. It makes it something that is exciting and challenging, and one where creativity and our personal connections are what gets us through.
So Greta, I want to come back to you, because what's interesting to me about the conversation, you started off by saying that you felt that, or you indeed were alone in terms of undertaking this strike action, but you stuck with it. And what we've heard from the others on the panel is that actually there are people like you, people who have similar passion or concern about this topic around the world. If you were to think about how you would like to see youth stand up together and engage on this in a way that would be more visible and make people feel less alone, what would that look like to you? How would you like to, what do you think it would look like if more people from your city or from your country stood together and began to talk to government, just like you've been doing?
I think that people wouldn't listen more. We young people, we need to get angry and to hold the older generations accountable for the mess they have created and expect us to live with. But if children got together and made their voices heard together, it would put pressure on people with power and other people, and of course that would make a huge difference.
When you spend time here at COP24, or again now you're attracting a fair amount of visibility because of what you've done. The media has identified you as someone who really stands out because you were willing to stand up and speak to our leaders in a way that many of them probably have not been directly engaged by youth like you recently. Do you think, do you get a sense from this type of event, the COP24, do you see others who you feel like you can make connections with and that you can create a global movement together, or is this something that has to stay local or has to stay national? How do we build bridges so that we can get common momentum, but make sure that the leaders are responsive to people of their country or their city?
I mean, since this is a very global problem, we have to solve it globally. We can't solve it individually, but of course we need to do that as well. But we can't change the world. I mean, I live in a very, very rich countries where we have very high emissions per capita. And we always said, no, we shouldn't focus on our emissions. We're just a small country. We should focus on other countries' emissions. But we are, Swedes are living like if we had 4.2 planets. And we can't tell other people in other countries to reduce their emissions. We have to reduce our emissions.
Question for the rest of you, similar vein. This is someone who can stand here and talk about how we are overusing resources, how we are polluting, how we are not paying attention to our own actions, but we're looking at others and having expectations about them. So someone who is kind of seeing through the fog of what stories are being told by the media, by politicians, by the business community, and they see things very directly and straightforwardly linking back to their life over the long term. How do we have more voices like this come forward around the world? What can we do through each of the mechanisms that you have access to facilitate that? Whether it's through formal processes in your own government, formal processes that you have access to here via the Paris Agreement or through the convention itself, whether it's through the media, whether it's through the advocacy work that you're engaging in. How do we get more stories like this to stand up and be heard?
Well, I mean, everyone has a phone now. I mean, you look at social media and it is kind of an exercise in storytelling. It's people connecting on that human level and sharing their experiences. I can't help but feel like I've heard the frustration that I hear in Greta's voice for 10 years. I've heard it throughout all my life. I think what we need to start doing and what we need to bring into these conversations is that we keep looking at how we're going to fix this problem by living within the same society. We're not changing the structures in which we live in. We keep coming to the same kinds of conversations year after year. And I think what's important for people to remember is that this is not the only way that we can live or be, that we're going to have to start addressing that and start addressing how we live as human beings and start cherishing our relationships to each other and to the planet over the same processes year after year, over big business, over more of the same. And I'm starting to see that conversation happening more in the fringes and with young people and with people who have been hearing the same frustration and the same conversation year after year. And I think that we're starting to connect and make that more of the main conversation that's happening.
Minister, is there a way that we can do that through the processes that you have access to on a regular basis?
First, I'd like to say that we represent the real world. And that is what we have been advocating under the Marrakesh Partnership for Global Climate Action. We know how climate change affects us, whether it be drought, whether it be climate-induced disasters, whether it be through health and air pollution and so forth. Therefore, because we represent the real world, we have to find ways and means in which our stories can be heard. Through the processes, we have the Talanoa dialogue, but that does not stop us from sharing our own stories through social media, through our own networks, through our own communities. But let us share our stories. But most importantly, it's about contributing. It's about finding solutions as well. I would say to the youths, you have to step out and step up. This is the time to act. Act now. We have to raise ambitions. And of course, you need to knock on the doors of your governments. You have to make use of the processes that are in place so that you can, again, have your voices heard. And I hope that your voices will be taken seriously. And it's about offering solutions as well. You can be counted. You can take responsibility. You can be involved in group works and whatever that can contribute towards a lower carbon emission and of course towards a net zero emission as well by mid-century. So processes are in place, but I would encourage us to step up and of course find ways and means in which we can be heard and of course contribute as well.
I see it at 4 levels. First of all, we need citizen-driven solutions. Every citizen is an individual. Every individual has the power to make something positive in the society or something negative. We have to canalize the energy from the positive mind to from the negative mind to the positive ones so that we can really connect people. People doing good connect together. People doing bad connect together. How do we transform this connection into something big for the society? Secondly, I think we really need intergenerational dialogue. We can learn a lot from the elder generation, and young people have to stop thinking that they have all the knowledge. Young people have the passion, the time, the energy, but sometimes they also need the knowledge. They also need the experience. They also need the mentoring, the mentorship, the support. I also think that we have to think in a way how we transform our problems into opportunities. Climate change is a problem. There are so many opportunities that can come out of it. Opportunities for individuals, opportunities for communities, but also opportunities for the planet, the planet. Because today we talk about greening our economy, greening the world, planting more trees. If climate change will have not exist, I don't think we will have gone in that direction, which means there's something positive out of it. We have to exploit further. And finally, I think we have to use creative ways to connect people. Music, cinema, movies, dance, all these creative ways of showcasing, connecting, inspiring could also help to really bring people together. In 2012, during the Rio Plus 20 conference, we organized a global youth music competition. More than 400 young people around the world submitted music, some of them working together into groups, bands. And we brought the winners to Rio, and they performed with Playing for Change. You know the band Play for Change, which is a global one based in the US. And it really brought people to understand that you can communicate about sustainable development by using music. Slater communicates about climate change by using cinema, movies. I have worked in a project called Global Dialogues, where we use cinema to educate young people about sexuality, HIV, and how they can have better practice. So all these capacities can really bring people together, and I think there are potential there that we have to explore.
Okay, why don't we, does anybody on the panel have a question for others on the panel that you'd like to ask? And then we'll turn to the audience here. Okay.
Thank you.
Let's give Greta a big round of applause. I'm afraid she has to head off to her next appointment. So thank you, Greta. All right. Questions from the audience? Anybody have any questions for our panelists?
I have a question
please.
I have a question for Fiji. I want to know, how will you ensure that the Talanoa spirit continue in the next couple of years, because we have this structure in the UNFCCC that one country has the presidency and then works with the new presidency for the next conference the next year, and then it's over and we forget about. And I have seen so many countries coming in, coming out, coming in, coming out, and sometimes they bring very good ideas, but how do you ensure to maintain that through the process?
Thank you. As part of the UNFCCC processes, unfortunately, it's not Fiji that designs. It's the parties that decide. But there has been a lot of positive comments, and hopefully they will come to some decisions on that. But on the other hand, the Talanoa concept has gone viral in other regions and other parties. Non-party organizations are organizing and conducting their own Talanoas, which is very positive, and we are indeed thankful that they have embraced the principle and the concept of Talanoa as a way and means of getting stories heard, and of course finding solutions to the problems as well. So we are positive, we are optimistic that it will continue, and that probably will be a legacy that the Fijian presidency leaves as our contribution to the UNFCCC processes.
Any questions from the audience? Can we get a microphone?
Hello, thank you very much. I'm Peter Stott from the Met Office in the UK and the University of Exeter. I'd like to ask you a question related to some of the work that I've been doing, and also just to pay tribute to the work that all the panel have done in this area about bringing these stories to life. Because as scientists, of course, we've talked about the issue of climate change for over 20 years since I've been doing this, and we've sort of, we wrestle with this in terms of whether we should be doing this better, in effect. I've been leading a project called Climate Stories, which has really, I think, uncovered that as scientists, as a group, we're really keen to work with you guys to see how we can develop stories together. Do you have a sort of message for the scientific community of what we could do better, or how we could work with you guys? You talked about the knowledge, and you talked about stories, how we can bring that together to help us all progress where we want to get to.
I would say that we are thankful to the scientific community for all the good work that they have been undertaking, but I have stated earlier that we represent the real world. I come from a small coastal village in Fiji, and when you talk about climate change and how it has affected us, I am in the front line of climate change. In my village alone, we have through government assistance, this is the third coastal protection that has been constructed in my village. The first one as a result of the rise in sea level has been underwater, and then we continue to as part of the adaptation and resilience program. So I think it's the connection between the real world and science that is very, very critical, and in whatever way we can help to advocate and raise awareness, because there is a real connection now between the science and the real world, which we cannot deny.
I think in a way you almost answered your own question. It is that willingness and that desire to work with people outside of the scientific community to make it accessible to the greater world. I think sometimes it can be hard. We're all coming to these COPs, we're within this community and this network, but there's a whole world out there that is not having this conversation every day, and it's how do we make it a part of the everyday, day-to-day conversation. And so yes, having those collaborations I think is key between the scientific community and civil society, and making it accessible.
Yeah, I fully agree as well, because for example, if you want to organize a drawing competition about the value of forests in a tropical community, for example, the first thing that people who have to participate, who will be interested to participate in the competition will be to do research on their own about the topic. And I have seen it with the Global Dialogues competition context that we organize. The real impact is not about what young people or the citizens participating will win, actually. The real impact is the knowledge that they gain when they go through finding their own information. And you really see people transforming their life, because at the beginning they wanted to win a prize, but they got more information about the issue, which is really affecting their life. When you don't have the best way of dealing with some of the global challenges, you cannot know that you could be affected about. And if the information is not available because of coming from the research community, from the expert, then people will not find the right information. Then you have this spread of fake information, wrong information. And I really think that when I look at a recent video from Greenpeace about the exploitation of palm oil by destroying forests because of making sure that we have enough palm oil to produce our chocolate, the way this kind of topic was addressed in the past was not really getting to the mind of the people. But now they started with this little girl in a room with a monkey trying to tell the story how this monkey ended in my room, for example. And when you go from this very simple child playing with an animal in a room, you go to a bigger issue, you get it right away. So, but in order to get there, you really need to have the correct information. And I think collaboration with the research and the expert panels and people and institutions is very key. And I will be personally interested to talk to you after this session to explore further collaboration.
Okay, well, I think we're going to have to stop. I really want to thank our panel. Great conversation, a variety of different perspectives. I'm sorry Greta had to leave, but I think we can all agree that I know I couldn't do that when I was 15 years old, and I doubt many of us. Slater, you seem to be the exception up here, that you got an early start at this as well, and it's incredibly powerful, incredibly important. And what I like about the conversation we had today was that how we encourage more of that, whether it's through art, through advocacy, or through even leadership of government stepping up or capitalizing on the institutions that do exist that haven't been used in this way before. And so all the credit to Fiji for what they've managed to achieve with the Talanoa Dialogue. But please thank our panel. Again, I really appreciate your joining us here today. Thank you very much. We have a trailer from Slater's movie that we're going to broadcast right now.
Do you remember what it was like to be a kid? The world seemed so huge. Your future was going to be great.
Come on then, high five, Slater!
If there was a big problem, the grown-ups would take care of it.
Losing my future is not like losing an election or a few points on the stock market.
But what if there was a big problem and the grown-ups didn't take care of it? That's what the kids do then.
We place our trust in you. You should be ashamed.
This is the story of a girl who was worried about a big problem.
We have a lot of work to do. I'm passing on the baton to you.
She had friends around the world.
Would it hurt you just to come take a look?
As the youth, we're standing here to say our voices will be heard.
If they aren't willing to lead us into a future that we would be proud to leave our children, then they should get out of the way.
What happens when the grown-ups stop fixing the big problems? The young people don't stop. The young people don't stop.